The first time I noticed it, I wasn't looking for anything wrong. It was a Tuesday in November, and I was walking corridor E7 on sub-level B2, same as I did every night, between 1 and 2 a.m. And the hallway was too long. Not dramatically, not in a way I could have pointed to and said, there, that's the problem. It was more like the fluorescent fixture at the far end, the one above the mechanical room door, was a few seconds further away than it should have been. I'd walked that corridor hundreds of times. I could do it without thinking, and that was exactly the problem. I wasn't thinking. I was just walking, and my body knew before my mind did that something was off. I reached the mechanical room door and turned around, and the T-junction behind me looked small and far away, like I was seeing it from the wrong end of a telescope. I counted my steps on the way back, 86. I had never counted before, so the number meant nothing to me yet. The building is called the Elgin, mixed-use high-rise, 14 floors above grade, 3 below, west side of Chicago. I'm the overnight facilities technician, which means I'm alone in the building from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., responsible for monitoring HVAC, checking the sump pumps, responding to after-hours maintenance calls from the residential floors, and doing a full walkthrough of the sublevels once a night. I've been doing overnight maintenance in large buildings for 11 years. I took this job in October 2023 because the differential was good, and because the Elgin is a newer building built in 2004, which means fewer surprise problems with plumbing and electrical, clean systems, good documentation, everything where the drawings say it should be. That was my experience for the first month, at least. Corridor E7 is the main service corridor on B2, running north-south along the eastern side of the building. It starts at a T-junction off the main access corridor and runs straight south for 162 feet, according to the construction drawings, ending at a mechanical room that houses 2 of the building's air handling units. Along the left wall, there are 6 service doors at roughly 25-foot intervals, each accessing a utility chase or electrical subpanel room. On the right wall, there's a single door about halfway down that opens into a janitorial closet. The corridor is 8 feet wide, poured concrete floor, painted CMU block walls, cable tray on the ceiling, fluorescent lighting, 11 fixtures, the same 4-foot tubes they use everywhere in the sublevels. There is no reason for anyone other than me to be in corridor E7 after midnight. In 5 months, I never saw another person down there. After that first night, I started counting my steps every time I walked E7. I needed a baseline. Over the next several shifts, I consistently got between 71 and 75 steps from the T-junction to the mechanical room door, which, at my stride length, works out to about 155 to 165 feet. That's in line with the drawings. The corridor was the right length. I decided I'd been tired that Tuesday night and let it go, though I wrote, "Corridor felt long" in the margin of my shift log, which is something I do. I keep margin notes, impressions, small things I want to remember. For 10 days, nothing was unusual. Then, on November 23rd, I entered E7 at about 1:15 a.m. and felt the same wrongness. That sense of the far end being too far away. I counted going in, 88 steps. I checked the mechanical room, both AHU units running normally, and counted coming back, 73. 88 going south, 73 going north. The corridor was not the same length in both directions. I stood at the T-junction for a while, trying to work out whether I'd miscounted. I'm not someone who makes errors like that. I've been recording measurements and readings my entire career, but I also knew that counting steps isn't an exact science, that your stride varies, that you can lose count if you're distracted. So I walked it again. 84 going south, 74 coming back. Still different, but the gap was smaller. I walked it a third time, 76 and 75. Nearly identical. The corridor had settled, or I'd settled, or whatever was happening had stopped. I wrote the step counts in my personal notebook, not in the official log. I wasn't ready to put this in writing where someone else might see it and draw conclusions about my mental state. November turned into December, and I walked E7 every night and counted every time, and the pattern became clear enough that I stopped being able to explain it away. Before 1 a.m., the corridor measured normally. After 1 a.m., on roughly half of my shifts, the step count going south was higher than the count coming back. The difference ranged from 8 to 17 steps. The corridor was longer in one direction than the other, which is not something a corridor can be. I also noticed that on the nights when the count was off, the air in E7 was different. There was a draft, cold and steady, moving from the south end toward the north, carrying a smell that wasn't the usual basement smell of concrete dust and machine oil. This air smelled like nothing. Clean, flat, empty air. The kind of air that hasn't been in contact with anything long enough to pick up a scent. I mentioned the draft to Ray Pulaski during shift change one morning. Ray is the daytime facility supervisor, 9 years at the Elgin. He said there shouldn't be any source of outside air in that part of B2. The only intakes are on the roof, feeding down through sealed ductwork. He suggested it might be a pressure differential from the AAU units cycling. That made enough sense to be plausible, so I let it rest. I didn't mention the step counts. I didn't mention that the corridor seemed to change length. I didn't mention any of it. On December 19th, I brought a tape measure down to E7. I measured the corridor at 10 a.m. during the overlap between my shift and Ray's. It was 161 feet 8 inches from the mechanical room door. That night, at 1:20 a.m., I measured it again, 184 feet, 22 feet longer. I measured it again at 1:45 a.m., 176 feet. It was contracting. At 2:10 a.m., I measured 163 feet, almost back to normal. The corridor was stretching and then slowly returning to its correct dimensions, and it was doing this in the middle of the night beneath a building full of sleeping people, and no one knew. I want to address the obvious questions because I've been through all of them. My 4-gas monitor, which I wear on my belt every shift, never alarmed in E7. No carbon monoxide, no combustible gases, no hydrogen sulfide, no oxygen deficiency. I sleep 7 hours a day, and I've worked overnights for over a decade without hallucinations. I don't take medications. I had blood work done in January that came back clean. The tape measure is a Stanley Fatmax 25-foot blade, and I used it in overlapping segments, marking each endpoint on the floor with chalk. The measurements are not estimates. January changed things. On the 14th, I entered E7 at 1:10 a.m. for my walkthrough, and there was a door on the left wall that I had never seen before. It was between the 4th and 5th service doors, in a section of wall that I had measured, touched, and walked past hundreds of times. Same flat gray paint as every other door in B2. Same lever handle, no label, no room number. I didn't react the way you might expect. I stopped, looked at it, and my first thought was that I had miscounted the doors and gotten disoriented. So I went back to the entrance and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, new door, 5, 6, 7 doors. There should be 6. I tried the handle. It opened. Behind it was a small room, roughly 8 by 8 feet, bare concrete walls, a single fluorescent fixture on the ceiling. Nothing inside. The floor was clean. Not dusty, not dirty, not weathered. The concrete looked freshly poured. The light was on. I stepped in, looked around, stepped out, and closed the door. Then I finished my walkthrough and went back upstairs and sat in the facilities office and wrote down everything I'd observed on a piece of paper that I folded and put in my locker. In the morning, I asked Ray to pull up the B2 floor plans on his computer. We looked at them together. 6 service doors in E7, evenly spaced. The space behind the wall between the 4th and 5th doors, according to the drawings, is the eastern foundation wall. And then, soil. There is no room there. There is nowhere for a room to be. Ray asked if I was sure about what I'd seen. I said yes. He went down that afternoon and checked. 6 doors. He walked the entire corridor twice. He called me at home and said everything looked normal. I asked him to check specifically between the 4th and 5th doors. He said he had. Just wall. That night I checked E7 at 11:45 p.m. 6 doors. Solid CMU block between the 4th and 5th. Mortar joints intact, paint unbroken. I pressed on it. Solid. I came back at 1:20 a.m. The 7th door was there. I opened it. Same room, same clean floor, same single light. I took a photograph. The door is visible in the photograph. The edge of the 4th service door frame is visible on the left side of the image. The photograph is on my phone. It exists. I asked Ray to stay late the next night so we could check together. He agreed. We walked E7 at 1 o'clock, 1:15, 1:30, 1:45. 6 doors every time. He left at 2 o'clock. I walked E7 at 2:10. 7 doors. The door does not appear when anyone else is present. Or it did not appear when Ray was present. I have no way of knowing which. Over the next month, I documented the 7th door appearing on 14 out of 23 shifts. It was always in the same location. The room behind it was always empty and clean. I started measuring the room. On February 3rd, it was 7 feet 11 inches by 8 feet 2 inches, with a 7.5 foot ceiling. On February 9th, it was 8 feet 4 inches by 8 feet 2 inches. By February 19th, it was 8 feet 4 inches by 9 feet 1 inch. The room was getting larger. The walls were moving outward, or the room was being replaced each night by a slightly bigger room. I don't know which interpretation is correct. Both are impossible. In late February, the room developed a sound. It was faint enough that I missed it on several visits before I became aware of it. A low, constant rushing, like air moving at speed through a large space. There were no vents in the room, no ductwork, no openings. The ceiling was flat, unbroken concrete. The sound seemed to come from behind the walls or below the floor. When I pressed my ear to the far wall, I could hear it more clearly, and underneath it there was something lower, almost subsonic, a rhythm that rose and fell over about 10 seconds. It wasn't mechanical. It didn't cycle the way a compressor or pump does. It was organic in its irregularity, and I could feel it faintly through the soles of my boots. I opened the 7th door, and the room was gone. In its place was a corridor. It extended straight ahead, perpendicular to E7, heading east, directly into the foundation wall and the soil on the other side. The corridor was narrower than E7, maybe 6 feet wide, with poured concrete walls, fluorescent fixtures, and cable tray on the ceiling, though the cables in the tray were thinner and more densely bundled than anything I'd seen in the Elgin systems. The corridor was fully lit. It extended further than I could see. There were gray doors on both sides, same style, same handles. The cold air was coming from inside, and the rushing sound was louder. I did not go in that night. I stood in the doorway and took 4 photographs. Concrete corridor, fluorescent light, doors, cable tray, clean floor, all clearly visible, all clearly real. I closed the door and finished my shift. I checked the AHU room. Both units were running normally. Everything was normal, except for the corridor that shouldn't exist heading east through solid earth, from a door that shouldn't exist in a wall that is solid during the day. I spent the next 2 weeks doing research. I pulled the Elgin's permit history from the city's database. No subgrade work after initial construction. No tunnel connections. The nearest underground infrastructure is the Blue Line, a quarter-mile south. I checked historical maps for previous structures on the site. A surface parking lot. Before that, a laundry building demolished in 1998. No basements. The geotechnical report in the permit file shows clay and fill to about 30 feet. Then, hard pan. No voids. I looked at what's east of the Elgin at street level. An alley, a 1920s residential building with a shallow basement, a commercial strip with no subgrade space. There is nothing for this corridor to connect to. There is nothing for it to be inside of. On April 3rd, I went in. I propped the 7th door open with a rubber doorstop. I tied mason's twine to the doorstop and let it unspool behind me as I walked east. The corridor was exactly what it appeared to be from the outside. Concrete, lit, clean, cold. Every door I tried was locked. At about 50 feet in, I reached an intersection. The corridor branched left, right, and continued straight ahead. 3 more corridors, all identical in construction, all lit, all extending beyond my line of sight. I stood there and listened. The rushing sound came from every direction. The low vibration from below was stronger here, detectable through my feet. I went straight, more corridor, more locked doors. At roughly 110 feet from the 7th door, another intersection. 4-way this time? I was looking at a grid. Regular, repeating, symmetrical. I turned around and followed the twine back. The walk back took longer than the walk in. I counted 67 steps going into the 2nd intersection, 91 steps coming back to the 7th door. The grid was doing the same thing E7 does, longer in the return direction. April 14th. I went deeper. 500-foot spool of twine. I walked east through 2 intersections. Turned south, walked through another. Turned east again. The grid was consistent. Same corridor width, same ceiling height, same doors, same lighting. Intersections spaced at about 60 to 70 feet. Every unlocked door, I found one for every 20 or 30 I tried, opened onto an empty concrete room, lit, clean, with cold walls that vibrated with that slow rhythm from below. The rooms were all about 12 by 12 feet. I used the full spool in about 12 minutes and turned back. The walk back took 19 minutes. I tried to leave markers, painter's tape on a door frame, gone the next night. A penny on the floor, gone. A scratch in the wall paint with my utility knife, gone. Either the grid resets or something removes them. But on April 28th, I found something that someone else had left. A single AA battery, Duracell, lying against the base of a wall about 2 intersections in. It was warm, like it had been recently used. It was the first object I'd ever encountered inside the grid that wasn't part of its construction. I put it in my pocket. It's in my locker now. It tests at 1.4 volts. It's a normal battery. I found it in an impossible place. May. I found tally marks scratched into a wall 3 intersections deep. At chest height, 3 groups of 5. 15. The scratches were slightly weathered, not fresh. Someone had stood in that corridor and counted something 15 times. This was not something I could reconcile with the theory that I was experiencing a perceptual disturbance. Perceptual disturbances do not produce batteries and tally marks. The grid continued to expand through the summer. Each time I went in, the intersections were farther apart. The corridors extended further. There were more doors. I never found an exterior wall. I never found a dead end. The grid goes until you decide to turn around, and it is always bigger than the last time you entered. I began to think of it as being underneath the city, not just underneath the Elgin. There is no reason it would stop at the building's footprint. It doesn't respect the building's footprint. It doesn't respect anything about the structure above it. In August, the 7th door began appearing earlier. At first, it was just a few minutes, 12:55 instead of after 1 o'clock. By September, it was showing up at 12:30. By October, 12:15. The threshold was moving. The door wanted to be open longer, or whatever process created it was accelerating. E7 itself had become unstable. On some nights, the corridor measured 20, 30, 40 feet longer than it should, with extra doors on the left wall, 9 instead of 6. And the step counts were wildly inconsistent. The corridor would stretch and then contract back to normal over the course of an hour, like something breathing. I opened the 7th door and heard footsteps inside the grid for the first time. Distant, steady, the unmistakable sound of hard-soled shoes on concrete. They were somewhere deep in the corridors, impossible to localize because of the echoes, maintaining a constant rhythm. Someone was walking in the grid. I closed the door. The next night, the footsteps were there again. They were there every night after that, always distant, always steady, never approaching. On November 2nd, I went in to investigate. I followed the sound south from the first intersection. The footsteps stayed ahead of me, never getting closer, as if whoever was making them was moving at my exact pace. After 4 minutes, I stopped. The footsteps continued for 2 or 3 seconds, and then stopped. Silence. Then they started again, from a different direction. I left. The walk back took 11 minutes for a 4-minute trip in. I told one person, Mike Deering, an overnight security guard at a hospital on the south side, someone I trust. He listened. He asked reasonable questions. He told me to stop going in alone, which is advice I couldn't follow because I am always alone. That is the nature of the job. December. The 7th door was appearing at 11:50 p.m. The grid behind it had changed. At the first intersection, about 60 feet in, the lights were off. Not flickering, not failing. Off. For the first time since I discovered the grid, part of it was dark, and from the darkness I could hear the footsteps, louder than they'd ever been, and underneath them the rushing air, and underneath that the slow breathing from below. And something else, a high, thin tone at the upper edge of my hearing, steady and unbroken, coming from inside the dark section. I don't know what it was. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't wind. I closed the door. I stopped going in. The 7th door still appears every night. Last week it was there at 11:31 p.m. The footsteps are audible through the closed door now if I stop and listen. The vibration from below is detectable in the floor of E7 itself, not just inside the grid. The building structure is starting to carry what's underneath it. 3 days ago, on January 8th, something changed that I'm still trying to process. I was doing my walkthrough of the upper floors, responding to a noise complaint on the 9th floor. Resident in unit 912 said she'd been hearing a low hum through her floor since about midnight. I checked the unit below hers, which was vacant. The sound was there, faint, rhythmic, rising and falling over about 10 seconds. I knew immediately what it was. I'd been feeling it through my boots in the grid for months, the rhythm from below. It was on the 9th floor, that is 7 stories above grade and 12 above B2. There is no mechanical explanation for a subsonic vibration originating in a subgrade corridor network to be detectable on the 9th floor of a 14-story building. The resident asked me what it was. I told her it was probably a rooftop unit cycling, and I'd look into it. I went to the roof and checked all the equipment. Everything was running normally. I went down to B2 and walked E7. The 7th door was there. It was 12:08 a.m., the earliest I've ever seen it. I pressed my hand against the door without opening it, and I could feel the vibration through the steel. The footsteps on the other side were louder than I'd ever heard them through the door. No longer distant, no longer deep in the grid, but close. Just on the other side, I could hear the pace of them, the individual strikes of each foot on concrete. Someone was walking back and forth just beyond the door, maybe 10 feet inside the corridor, close enough that if I opened it, I would see them. I did not open it. I stood there for a long time. The footsteps continued back and forth, with the patience of someone who has nowhere else to be. Eventually, I stepped back, finished my walkthrough, checked the AHU units, and went upstairs. In the facilities office, I pulled up the building's HVAC monitoring software on the computer and looked at the temperature readings for B2. The sensors in E7 showed 51 degrees. The corridor normally sits at 62 to 65. An 11-degree temperature drop. The cold from the grid is leaking into E7. It's leaking through a closed door. I've been copying my photographs and notes to a USB drive. The drive is in a safe deposit box. My shift logs are in a fireproof bag in my apartment. I'm not sure what I expect to happen. The pattern says the 7th door will keep appearing earlier. A month ago, it was 11:50 p.m. Now it's 12:08, but that's not a contradiction. The time fluctuates, but the trend is a steady creep toward the start of my shift. At the current rate, it will be appearing before 11 p.m. within a few weeks. That means it'll be there when I arrive. Eventually, it will be there during the day. Eventually, Ray will see it. Eventually, a resident will wander down to B2 for some reason and find a door in a wall that the building plans say is solid. And they'll open it, and they'll see the corridor, and they'll hear the footsteps, and they'll feel the breathing from below. And now the vibration is on the 9th floor. It has never been above B2 before. In 7 months of observation, the anomalies have been confined to E7 and the grid behind the 7th door. The resident in 912 heard it 3 nights ago. I checked again last night, standing in the hallway outside her unit at 2 a.m. The hum was there. It was also there on the 8th floor and the 7th. I didn't check any lower because I didn't need to. I already know what it sounds like. I know it's not a machine. The grid is underneath everything, and whatever is beneath the grid is making itself known through 12 stories of concrete and steel. And the footsteps behind the 7th door are no longer distant, and the door is appearing earlier every week. And 3 nights ago, a woman on the 9th floor heard the breathing and called it a noise complaint. I go to work tonight at 11 p.m. I will walk E7. The 7th door will be there. The footsteps will be on the other side. The cold will be leaking through, and somewhere above me, in the residential floors, someone will lie in bed and feel a faint vibration through their mattress and think it's the building settling, because that's what buildings do. They settle, they shift, they make sounds. They don't breathe. They don't grow new corridors in the middle of the night. They don't open doors into spaces that shouldn't exist. That's what I would have said a year ago. I don't know what I'd say now. The building is in good working order. All systems are operational. The seventh door is present nightly. The grid is expanding. The footsteps are close. The vibration is rising. I am submitting my shift log and returning tonight.